an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Time of Contempt, the next book in the Witcher series, Chapter 1. In this chapter, we are continuing with our defense of the Lion of Sintra, and we get introduced to a royal messenger whose death is foretold to him, but let's be real. Any foretellings of people's deaths are never actually useful to the person receiving that foretelling. It's like guaranteed. And I have to say it, at the least, he is unaware death is coming for him. Bless his heart. He's got a real George R. R. Martin habit of killing the people who appear in his first chapters, doesn't he? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This section I actually was saying right before I started recording, thank you to Melanie for commissioning this. I was listening to the audiobook because I was thinking about something. Those of you who follow the Unspoiled Book Club may remember that at the end of last year, I covered one of the Witcher books with Rashawn for the book club. And she and I found it hard to follow because of the structure of it, and I was doing the audiobook, and I believe that was part of it for her as well. She logged into my account and listened to the audiobook. And at the time, the audiobook, for people who aren't familiar with the Witcher series and weren't prepared for the structure of the book and the way it went in and out of present time, was rather confusing. However, I decided to give the audiobooks another try because I have noticed while reading the previous book for Spoil Me that there are some really sort of cinematic tendencies that Andres takes when he is doing his writing. And that's part of what I wasn't ready for in the audiobook, but I feel like now that I know it's coming, I am more prepared for it. And what I mean is, he will have a line of dialogue that almost treats the reader as if they are watching what's happening on screen and as aware of what's happening as the people who are in the scene. So, for example, in this section, there's a part where the man that Geralt is talking to, the basically shady Better Call Saul lawyer type, is in the middle of being like, yes, 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 and I know that you do this or that. And then all of a sudden he says, what is it about that portrait that's got your attention? And it's the kind of line of dialogue that you would expect in a script where they position the camera on Geralt's face and let us see that he is not actually looking at the man speaking to him, that his attention is focused somewhere else, and probably turn the camera towards the portrait so that we can actually see it ourselves. And that sort of style of writing is, I'm finding, working really, really well in the audiobook now that I understand it. And because I think this book isn't structured the way the series of short stories for the book club were. There is something about it that almost makes you feel as you're listening to it that you're like listening to the audio of a movie. In which things are happening, even though there's obviously narration in it and whatnot, there's just a sort of like sense of place. And especially the narrator of these is really, really good and has a voice for every character that is so distinctive and has its own accent and is just really easy to tell between who is talking. So I decided to just try the sample. And I was immediately like, oh, yeah, okay. Because I enjoy using audiobooks a lot of the time because there's something about them that helps me to focus. And I just was worried that I wasn't going to be able to do that with this writer. But I think it was just that particular book and the way that it was a series of short stories that jumped in and out of different points in time that left me a little confused. And I think this writer lends himself pretty well to audiobooks. So that's my little bit of advice for any of you who are checking this out, is really give those a try, because the narrator is fucking really talented. I have kind of been spoiled in terms of audiobooks by the Dresden Files, in which there is one narrator who can do these voices that are unbelievable. And sometimes I get frustrated when it feels like a narrator isn't even trying to distinguish between characters. But that is not the problem here at all. So anyway, so let's start with chapter 1. Well, right before that, we have a opening sort of stanza. Blood on your hands, Falca, blood on your dress, burn, burn, Falca, and die. Die in agony for your crimes. And then there is this description called Vedimins, called witchers among the Nordlings. So we found out that there is a different word for witchers. And I kind of like it. Vedimins, it's so close to vitamins. It's kind of funny to me. They are endowed with magical powers and superhuman abilities, yada, 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 all of the things that we already know. In combat, fell into a trance brought on, it is believed, by auto-hypnosis or intoxicating substances, fought with pure energy. The theory were said to have been the products of mutation or genetic engineering. They are the heroes of numerous Nordling tales. And this is from Encyclopedia Maxima Mundi, which we have seen quoted before. I'm almost positive. And I really like that we have seen so many things which have really decried witchers as being sort of abominations, but this is not doing that. This is really just giving an objective description of what people say and how they come about and what they do. So then we jump into chapter 1. We meet a character called Aplegatt. And Aplegatt is a royal messenger. And when we start this chapter, he's sort of reflecting on the things that are necessary to be successful in this job. The number one thing is to be able to memorize intricate messages and really memorize them so that you don't get a thing wrong. Because you can be carrying messages in your pouch that are written and sealed and whatever, but that shit can be stolen or burned or whatever. And you just need to be able to actually word for word memorize them in case of theft or something happening. And then the Ass of Iron, Head of Gold is the first thing, Ass of Iron, because that is just what you do, is ride a horse all fucking day. And it is a really interesting little tidbit later on that I liked, and I was surprised at how moving this sort of was. Aplegatt comes upon an inn at one point, and the innkeeper gives him a look of sort of dislike. And Aplegatt thinks to himself about how he is used to this reaction, because since he is a royal messenger, part of the law is that if you are running like a livery or an inn and you have a horse to provide, you by law must provide this royal messenger with a fresh horse if they ask for it. Which means you have a horse that you maybe raised from a foal, whom your children are very attached to, whom you've poured a lot of money into and grown emotionally, like really attached to. And you have to give it up. And you never know if you're going to get the horse back or not. And you can, get reimbursed for the cost of the horse through the magistrate, but that's not the actual issue for a lot of people. It's really, you want your horse back, and depending on where he goes, you don't know that you're going to see it again. And he thinks about watching children clinging to a horse that's being brought to him, crying, because this is their childhood pet, and he is taking it from them. And that's like the law. There is absolutely nothing to be done to resist this. And so whenever he comes upon an inn or someplace, he's always looked upon with some measure of suspicion and, what's the word I want here? Trepidation, because they never know if he's going to be taking their property away. And I really was like, wow, that is, I would guess, probably how things worked, but I never really thought about people growing attached to their animals in that way, because I think of that as a more modern phenomenon, and that's not true at all. You know, I think of it that way because we are no longer in a time in a lot of our society where our livelihoods are dependent on these animals for transportation or anything like that. So my expectation is that you grow more attached to them as a pet when you aren't quite as dependent on them, but that you are a lot more practical about it when you have them in your lives as a provider of transportation and something that is really a means to an end in a lot of ways. But people are people. Of course they got attached to their horses, you know? So anyway, just a little bit of a side tangent there, because I just really liked that detail and I did not expect it, and I was really kind of saddened by it, you know? And somebody, when he's introducing these kids to the idea of becoming a messenger, they ask, but who needs mounted messengers now, Master Aplegatt? Take Vengerberg to Vizima. No one could knock that off in less than 4 or 5 days, even on the swiftest steed. But how long does a sorcerer from Vengerberg need to send news to a sorcerer from Vizima? Half an hour, or not even that. A messenger's horse may go lame, but a sorcerer's message always arrives. It never loses its way or gets lost. What's the point of messengers? For some time, Aplegatt had also been thinking he was no longer of any use to anyone. He was 36 and small, wasn't afraid of hard work, and he could have found other work to support himself and his wife. But he couldn't and didn't want to imagine any other job. And then after a long period of being forgotten and humiliatingly idle, Aplegatt was once again needed, and the highways and forest tracks once again echoed to the sound of hooves. Just like the old days, messengers began to travel the land bearing news from town to town. It was expected that he would immediately erase each message from his memory once it had been given, that he would forget it so as to be unable to recall it even under torture. But Aplegatt remembered. He knew why kings had suddenly stopped communicating with the help of magic and sorcerers. The news that the messengers were carrying was meant to remain a secret from them. Kings had suddenly stopped trusting sorcerers, stopped confiding their secrets in them. Aplegatt didn't know what had caused this sudden cooling off in the friendship between kings and sorcerers, and wasn't overly concerned about it. He regarded both as incomprehensible creatures, predictable in their deeds, and the fact that times were now hard could not be ignored. So I really like that there's this moment of him feeling like he's basically obsolete. And then all of a sudden, he's being employed again. And it's because using sorcerers to send messages, while much faster, you are having to entrust people who might have their own agendas and abilities to hear private information. And somebody like Aplegatt, nobody's expecting him to have an agenda. He has no power. There's nothing in this for him. You know, sure, he could trade what information he has for money from somebody, but as soon as he does that, word will get out. That's what he's done. It'll be traced back to him, and then he's out of a job. And he likes this job, so he wouldn't risk that. So we get some details about his traveling on this road, and he had heard that there was going to be trouble. A troop of Lyrian cavalry had clashed with a mounted Nilfgaardian unit. Maeve, the queen of Lyria, whose name I recognize, had loudly accused Nilfgaard of provocation, again, and called for help from King Demavend of Aedern. Tretogor had seen the public execution of a Redanian baron who had secretly allied himself with emissaries of the Nilfgaardian emperor, Emir. So Emir is the one that we met last book, who is pretty brutal about torturing publicly and ruling with an iron fist. Feels like too soft a word. But yeah, he is somebody. The public execution deal is Emir's favorite thing. And he was ordering somebody to do it and to watch it that was made sick by the idea of it, never mind actually seeing it. And I really felt bad for that guy. So I remember that scene distinctly. And then there's other dark gossip. In several villages, cows had begun to squirt blood while being milked. At dawn, the Virgin Bane, harbinger of terrible destruction, had been seen in the fog. The Wild Hunt had appeared in Bruges, which always heralds war. A spectral ship had been spotted off Cape Bremervoord. Like, all of this stuff is just the usual sort of, harbingers of death, destruction, and war. And he is just thinking over that things have started to get really hairy, basically. And everything is a lot less sure and just riddled with danger than it had been. But he is not yet at a point where he's worried for his own safety. That's not really what's entering his mind here. It's more about the general change in the shift in atmosphere and the absence of peace that had been. So he's getting up in the morning after staying at an inn and getting his horse, and he runs into this girl. Hi. The girl rubbed her face and yawned, leaning against the horse's withers. Oh my, I'll probably fall asleep on my horse. I'll just flake out. And she turns to look at him. Her eyes were large and green as emeralds. Aplegatt threw the saddlecloth over his horse. I wished you a safe journey, he said. He wasn't usually talkative or effusive, but now he felt the need to talk to someone, even if this someone was just a sleepy teenager. May the gods protect you, he added, from accidents and foul weather. There are but 2 of you, and womenfolk at that, and times are ill at present. Danger lurks everywhere on the highway. The girl opened her green eyes wider. The messenger felt his spine go cold, and a shudder passed through him. Danger, the girl said suddenly in a strange, altered voice. Danger comes silently. You will not hear it when it swoops down on gray feathers. I had a dream. The sand. The sand was hot from the sun. What? And he's just like, basically, girl, what the fuck's happening? Meanwhile, some black-haired woman, whom we certainly don't know, yells to Ciri to hurry the fuck up. And Ciri runs out, finally, because she, starts to get off her horse and come inside. And this is he spends some time thinking about this, but then is just like, all right, you know what? This girl might just not be quite right. She might have been either she has some sort of mental illness or something has addled her. And he even says deranged girls spoiled by vagabonds and ne'er-do-wells. Basically saying, maybe she was raped so much she lost her mind. Which, Jesus Christ, apparently that's not uncommon. So, we know by the end what this is, but poor Aplegatt doesn't know that he just came across 2 people that he is going to be asked about later, that he would be able to place. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised at the fact that Yennefer is still using her name Ciri. I would have thought that they would have changed it again. But, for the simplicity of the story, I'm kind of glad they haven't, because it's hard for me to remember shifts like that all the time. So Aplegatt heads out, and he really, pushes it. He's going hard. And part of that is just nerves, right? The day before, he had given Foltest a letter and recited King Demavend's secret message. Demavend to Foltest. All is prepared in Dol Angra. The disguised forces await the orders. Estimated date, the 2nd night after the July new moon. The boats are to beach on the far shore 2 days later. Foltest to Demavend. Firstly, let us call off the campaign. The windbags have called a council. They are going to meet and debate on the island of Thanedd. This council may change much. Secondly, the search for the lion cub can be called off. It is confirmed. The lion cub is dead. So, then we go to further down the road, where he runs into some people who are irritated because the road is backed up. And it turns out that there was a manticore that killed some knight. And the soldiers had to strike a deal with a witcher to kill the thing. And they wanted to underpay him. And the witcher was like, this thing is dangerous and I'm not fucking doing it for 100. You're going to give me 200. Eventually, they counteract. I think they counterbid with like 140, 130, something like that. And he agrees to do it. But it's a little while before they're able to move again. And so they're, exchanging a lot of gossip and stories about what the witchers are like and what this one in particular is like. And there's even some sort of like, not everybody really believes this whole witcher thing. Like some of them think that he's saying that he defeated it, but didn't. There's some weird sort of suspicion happening here. And I have to think that's coming from the fact that witchers aren't as common as they used to be. Geralt is one of like a remaining 4 in total, I think. And one of them isn't actually like even a viable fighter anymore, if I'm not mistaken, because he's too old. But yeah, I love this too, because they're describing the arguing between the witcher and the soldier, and the witcher telling the guy, like, this thing isn't, because basically the soldier is like, I'm not going to pay you, I'll just wait until it leaves. And the witcher's like, it just caught a guy and is hungry, and it's going to take a long time to eat him because he's covered in armor and it's hard to pick out the meat. Which I can't, guys, that cracked me up so bad. Like, I just had a picture in my head of this manticore with a pair of like those like lobster crusher things that you use to break lobster claws open, like sitting next to this knight and like cracking the armor open with a little container of fucking drawn butter that he's like dunking it in. I found that very amusing. So he says, which way was he headed? If so, I might catch him up just to have a look at him. He took the road to Dorian from the crossroads. He was in a hurry. So then we jump to Geralt. And he is having a dream, a nightmare, which is remarkable for him because he barely dreams ever. And what it is, it says, a distinct, clear image had suddenly emerged from a swirling vortex of unclear but disturbing shapes, of strange but foreboding scenes, and incomprehensible but sinister words and sounds. It was Ciri, but not as he remembered her from Kaer Morhen. Her flaxen hair flowing behind her as she galloped was longer, as it had been when they first met, in Brokilon. When she rode by, he wanted to shout, but no words came. He wanted to run after her, but it was as if he were stuck in setting pitch to halfway up his thighs. And Ciri seemed not to see him, and galloped on into the night between misshapen alders and willows waving their boughs as if they were alive. He saw she was being pursued, that a black horse was galloping in her tracks, and on it a rider in black armor, wearing a helmet decorated with the wings of a bird of prey. He couldn't move. He couldn't shout. He could only watch as the winged knight chased Ciri, caught her hair, pulled her from the saddle, and galloped on, dragging her behind him. He could only watch Ciri's face contort with pain, watch her mouth twist into a soundless cry. "Awake!" he ordered himself, unable to bear the nightmare. "Awake! Awake at once!" He awoke. So, first of all, I would like to say how jealous I am of the fact that he can do that, because, guys, I know that allegedly there are people out there who can, like, what do they call it? Conscious dreaming, or lucid dreaming, I guess is the one, where you can, like, go into dreams on purpose, and once you're there, you can control what's happening. But I am just not able to do that. And I would love it, because my dreams are so fucking vivid and so real and filled with so many details, and it's just, it would be great if I had some measure of control over that, but I do not. So yeah, I'm super jelly. And he is thinking about some job that he just did, killing a werewolf. He got 150 for yesterday's manticore. That's right. They came up to halfway. But the werewolf, he only got 50. And there is this really sad moment 50 for a werewolf. That was plenty, for the work had been easy. The werewolf hadn't even fought back. Driven into a cave from which there was no escape, it had knelt down and waited for the sword to fall. The Witcher had felt sorry for it, but he needed the money. And I found this really interesting. Like, as much as Geralt has worked for money over the course of all of these books, it's always been commission-based stuff. There has never been a feeling of urgency. It's always sort of felt like, you can pay me to do this work because I'm valuable and you should pay me. And you probably won't be able to do this unless, you have somebody as talented as me. But if you don't want to pay me, I'll get by and I'll be fine. So this sentence, but he needed the money, feels like something has really shifted for him. And we find out later why that is, that he's trying to gather information and find people who will help him, and he has to be able to pay them. So the fact that this particular job of his, job is the wrong word, this mission that he has set for himself of protecting Ciri, this is draining him a little bit and forcing him to take work that I'm not saying he would otherwise not bother with, but it makes him a little bit more concerned about it than he would have been before. So I found that interesting. So he comes up to this place called Codringer and Fen Legal Consultation and Services. Geralt knew only too well that Codringer and Fen's trade had little in common with the law, while the partners themselves had a host of reasons to avoid any kind of contact, either with the law or its enforcers. He also seriously doubted if any of the clients who showed up in their chambers knew what the word consultation meant. So there's, the description of the house and even the front door and everything. And he goes to the door and knocks and sort of slides to the side because there are security measures in place that often go wrong and shoot iron spikes out as a security measure, but they don't always wait for the triggering of the mechanism in order to shoot out. And people have gotten hurt/killed in the past by mistake. So he knows that this is there and immediately pulls off to the side. And Codringer comes to answer and is like, oh, you don't have to worry about it. I actually disabled it because it went off the other day, drilled a few holes in a hawker, which was just oh man, that sucks. Poor guy. And when Witcher comes in, Codringer is asking, do you have a case for me? And the Witcher says, not for you, for Fen. And Codringer starts cackling. And this, to the Witcher, confirms that Fen isn't real. That Codringer is the only one that's operating here. And he's just put Podringer and Fen in order to, put people off the scent who are trying to track down how he does what he does, or just sometimes there is a sense of legitimacy to a partnership business versus a business that is run by one man. And I've seen that before, in different stories. I won't say I've seen it in life, but I'm sure it's out there. Just pulling some name and just putting it on your sign because it sounds better that you have a partner. There's a sense of checks and balances there that I think makes people feel safe that, well, both of you aren't probably total crooks. If there's just one of you, who knows? You might be and you might screw me. But if there's two of you, that's less likely. Which I find really, incredible since a lot of, cons take more than one person to accomplish. But whatever. It turns out the Witcher is quite incorrect. He really is confident that Fen is not real. But it turns out that Fen is real, but he's disabled. He's a dwarf, and I think he doesn't have any legs as well. And so he's not able to go around and collect information in the way that's valuable for these guys. It's more that he is able to interpret that information because he's very, very intelligent. So Witcher kind of puts that down as half right, because to him, this guy is sort of represented as being a power on par with Codringer. And as far as he is concerned, the fact that Fen has to stay hidden and that they don't want to even confirm that he's real unless demanded makes him less powerful. And I'm not sure the Witcher's right about that. And we get a description of what these guys are in. In an upholstered armchair behind an oaken desk lounged Codringer, a man who introduced himself as a lawyer, a man for whom nothing was impossible. If anyone had difficulties, troubles, problems, they went to Codringer, and would quickly be handed proof of his business partner's dishonesty and malpractice. Or he would receive credit without securities or guarantees, or find himself the only one from a long list of creditors to exact payment from a business which had declared itself bankrupt. He would receive his inheritance, even though his rich uncle had threatened he wouldn't leave them a farthing. He would win an inheritance case when even the most determined relatives unexpectedly withdrew their claims. His son would leave the dungeon cleared even of charges based on irrefutable evidence, or would be released due to the sudden absence of any such proof. For when Codringer and Fenn were involved, if there had been proof, it would mysteriously disappear, or the witnesses would vie to retract their earlier testimonies. A dowry hunter courting their daughter would suddenly direct his affections toward another. A wife's lover or daughter's seducer would suffer a complicated fracture of 3 members, including at least one upper one, in an unfortunate accident. Or a fervent enemy or other extremely inconvenient individual would stop doing him harm. As a rule, they were never seen or heard of again. Yes, if someone had a problem, they could always ride to Dorian, run swiftly to Codringer and Fenn, and knock at the mahogany door. Codringer, the lawyer, would be standing in the doorway, short, spare, and grizzled, with the unhealthy pallor of a person who seldom spent time in the fresh air. Codringer would lead them into his office, sit in his armchair, lift his large black and white tomcat into his lap, and stroke it. The two of them, Codringer and the tomcat, would measure up the client with identical, unpleasant, unsettling expressions in their yellowish-green eyes. So, that is a pretty sick introduction. I really enjoyed that. And I also like the fact that there's a real, sort of vibe to The Witcher throughout this scene, that he considers these guys beneath him. And that leads to the title of the book, because there is a measure of contempt, but he, because of the way things are right now, has to rub shoulders with these guys. Rubbing shoulders isn't even, he relies on them for information that he can't seem to get in any other way. And I think he really resents that. And that's something that I think a lot of people who get into positions that, not even a position of power, but they're going up against people in positions of power, they realize that unless you soften your standards for the kinds of people you are willing to work with, you're not going to get a lot done. And not everybody is able to be okay with crossing the line that they have drawn for themselves in the sand. So not everybody has the stomach for getting it done. And he says something about having talked to Dandelion, which, Dandelion, I just can't, guys. I don't know which one to choose. I just choose one at random as his name comes up. And he says he said too little, to which Geralt's like, what? He's always talked too much. What are you talking about? And Codringer says, where does your lack of trust come from, especially toward a professional colleague? This visibly annoyed Geralt. Codringer would probably have pretended not to notice, but he couldn't because of the cat. It opened its eyes wide, bared its white fangs, and hissed almost silently. Did it bother you to be called a colleague? But it's true. I'm also a witcher. I also save people from monsters and from monstrous difficulties, and I also do it for money. And Geralt obviously objects to this comparison, and Codringer continues to sort of make it, and also alleges that Geralt is behind the times, if anything. He's like, yeah, you fight monsters, but there are way few monsters than there used to be, and there are always going to be sons of bitches out there. He calls them horse sons. And Geralt's like, yeah, there will be horse sons, and they aren't the ones that you usually help. You help rich people. And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I need to get paid for what I do. I'm not apologizing for that. I mean, Geralt just had to bargain in order to rid the place of a manticore earlier. You know, he's not doing this out of the kindness of his heart either. So, my fee is 250 Novigrad crowns. Do you have that kind of money? First, let's establish whether you've done enough to deserve a sum like that. Decide for yourself and be quick about it. Once you feel convinced, lay the money on the table. Then we'll move on to other less important matters. And Geralt gives him the money and is just really snotty about it. And finally, Codringer tells him about Rience. Rience is also from the last book, was that guy who had just really been like on Ciri's tail. And he says that there's like a lot that's unknown about this guy. He was a student at the School for Sorcerers in Banard for 2 years. They threw him out after catching him thieving. Recruiting officers were waiting outside the school, and Rience allowed himself to be recruited. I was unable to determine what he did for the Cagewind Secret Service, but sorcerers' rejects are usually trained as killers. Does that fit? Like a glove. Go on. My next information comes from Sintra. Rience served time in the dungeons there during Queen Calanthe's reign. What for? For debts, would you believe? He didn't stay long, though, because someone bought him out after paying off the debts along with the interest. The transaction took place through a bank with the anonymity of the benefactor preserved. I tried to uncover it, but I couldn't do it, basically. Whoever bought Rience out was a pro and cared a great deal about preserving their anonymity. And then as soon as the war was over, Rience showed up in Sodden, Angren, and Brugge. And his behavior had completely changed. He was throwing around lots of money. He was not worried about secrecy. He kept on telling everybody exactly who he was. And he began to search intensively for a certain party. He visited the druids from the Angren Circle, the ones who looked after war orphans. One druid's body was found sometime later in a nearby forest, mutilated, bearing the marks of torture. And at this point, he starts to talk about Riverdale, and Geralt interrupts, and he's like, I know what he did to the Riverdale peasant family. I know all of this, and your information that you're giving me is nothing new and not worth the 250 that I pay you, so fucking tell me what is going on and who he works for. So Codringer's like, listen, it's a sorcerer, obviously. I mean, he uses real magic. Somebody has continued to train him. And he says, were he on a magician's leash? This is actually Geralt talking. Rience would be using camouflaging magic, but he doesn't change his name or face. He hasn't even got rid of the scar from the burn Yennefer gave him. That confirms precisely that he is on a leash, because magical camouflage isn't camouflage at all. Only dilettantes use stuff like that. Were Rience hiding under a magical shield or illusory mask, it would immediately set off every magical alarm, and there are currently alarms like that at practically every city gate. Sorcerers never fail to detect illusory masks. Even in the biggest gathering of people in the biggest throng, Rience would attract all of their attention as if flames were shooting out of his ears and clouds of smoke out of his ass. So, I repeat, Rience is in the service of a sorcerer and is operating so as not to draw the attention of other sorcerers to himself. So, that was an interesting piece of information because I didn't know that there were those kinds of fail-safes in place to, like, spot using magical masks, basically, glamours. And I mean, Yennefer does that as well, but I don't know how she's able to, like, get in and out of places without that going off, because we know that she doesn't look like how she looks. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be that hers is less camouflage and more an actual change to her physical features that she's made, but I don't think so. So I would be interested if any of you have an explanation for why Yennefer is able to travel in and out of cities. I mean, maybe they're just not using the gates is the thing, because he says it's at the gates of every city. So he says, you think the sanctioned sorcerer is spying for Nilfgaard through Rience? Nonsense. A sorcerer spying for Nilfgaard. Why? For money? Risible. Counting on Ciri's power under the rule of the victorious Emperor Emir, even more ludicrous. Emir keeps his sorcerers on a short leash. Sorcerers in Nilfgaard are treated about the same as, let's say, stablemen, and they have no more power either. Which is a really interesting detail. The fact that sorcerers can be taken so for granted and treated so badly that they would refuse to work for somebody in a particular kingdom. What does any of this have to do with Rince? It's simple. The Nilfgaardian Secret Service is trying to get to a sorcerer by getting their factotum to work for them. From what I know, Rience wouldn't spurn the Nilfgaardian Florin and would probably betray his master without a second thought. And at that, Geralt's just like, you're so full of shit. There is no way. Whoever he's working for would figure it out right away. He'd be dead immediately. And to that, Codringer says, well, when you find out that somebody has betrayed you, you don't just kill them. You use them. You give them misinformation and make double agents, like, unwittingly out of them. Neither the arcana of intelligence work nor politics interest me. Rience is breathing down my neck, and I want to know why and on whose orders. So who is it? I don't know yet, but I soon will. Soon is too late for me. I in no way rule that out. You've landed in a dreadful pickle, and it's good you came to me. I know how to get people out of them. I already have, essentially. For you see, my friend, in addition to the sorcerer, and possibly also Nilfgaard, there is a third party in the game. I was visited, and mark this well, by agents from King Foltest's secret service. They had a problem. The king had ordered them to search for a certain missing princess. When finding her turned out not to be quite so simple, those agents decided to enlist a specialist in such thorny problems. While elucidating the case to the specialists, they hinted that a certain witcher might know a good deal about the missing princess, that he might even know where she was. And what did this specialist do? And he's like, oh, well, they acted really, really surprised. It astonished him that the aforementioned witcher had not been deposited in a dungeon. The agents replied they had been forbidden to do that. Witchers have such a sensitive nervous system they immediately die under torture when, as they described quite vividly, a vein bursts in their brains. Because of that, they had been ordered to hunt the witcher. The task had turned out to be taxing. The specialist praised the agents' good sense and instructed them to report back in 2 weeks. And they did. This specialist, who already regarded you as a client, presented the agents with hard evidence that Geralt the Witcher has never had and could never have had anything in common with the missing princess. For the specialist had found witnesses to the death of Princess Cirilla, granddaughter of Calanthe, daughter of Queen Pavetta. So he pulls up these people that he has bribed to tell a fake story about their deaths, and it's convincing enough that they believe it, and that's why they're reporting that the lion cub is dead. And he's asking, well, why are they looking for her? And he's like, dude, she's a pretender to the throne. What are you talking about? And Geralt is like, this doesn't make any sense. The Cintran throne is nothing anymore. Nilfgaard is the one ruling there. She is not any sort of threat. And she's also a woman, and the rules say that she can't be a queen by herself. And later on, they're talking about it, and they're like, yeah, but she can marry and get pregnant, and she can give birth to a male heir and rule through him or put him on the throne ahead of other people. Like, she is absolutely still a threat if she is still alive. Whether she personally can take the throne is kind of irrelevant. So there is an interesting moment where he asks, why don't cats like you? And he says, does it have something to do with that? And there's a pause, like not even a pause. It's more that Geralt interrupts and just is like, yes, it does. But we never hear what it is. So I'm very interested to know, because it's been mentioned before that Geralt has vertically slitted eyes like a cat. And I'm like, does the cat, like, do they take actual cat eyes and implant them? Does a cat sense that he's got a cat's eyes in his body? Like, what is that about? I am super curious about it, and I would really hate to be anything that made a cat hate me. Not that Geralt gives a shit, but I just found that really interesting and distracting. I was just like, but what's that about? So this is when he's brought in to meet Fen. And, oh yeah, here it is. So, I'm trying to see where it is. Oh yeah, and then he had no legs. Okay, yes, that's what I thought. I'm wondering if that's a result of an injury or if he was just born that way. But regardless, he's really knowledgeable and has a ton of information around him and is able to parse it really well and find what they need to find. So I've reduced the list of Rience's potential paymasters to 28 sorcerers. Leave that for the moment, Codringer interrupted quickly. I love that, because Codringer is trying to be like, oh, we've almost figured it out. And then he's like, yeah, there's about 30 people it could be. And it just makes them look really bad. And Codringer's like, keep a lid on that. So he is asking Fen to explain to the Witcher what it is about Ciri that makes her a target. And Fen is like explaining it with a tone to his voice, like, what do you mean you need me to explain it to you? This is super, super obvious. But the princess is dead, said Codringer, seeing the change in the smiling midget's words. And I'm sorry, guys, midget is a slur, but that's the word that's being used in this book. So when I'm reading the actual text, that's what I'm saying. But I'm going to call him a dwarf because that's apparently another acceptable term when I am not actually quoting the book itself. So the agents have learned that she is dead and called off their hunt. Only for now, said the Witcher. The thing about falsehoods is that they usually come to light. What's more, the royal agents are only one of the parties participating in this game. The agents were tracking Ciri in order to confound the other hunters' plans. Those others may be less susceptible to disinformation. So they have a long conversation here, and I'm not going to get into everything because some things happen later that I really want to be able to touch on. This first chapter is pretty long. The audiobook actually was almost 2 hours long, this first chapter, which I was just like, what? But they are going back and forth about various, like, what would be legal, what kind of threat she poses if she has children, and who she could potentially marry. They talk about some of the history of her own family, and the way that Queen Calanthe wanted to have a male heir and make sure that her family continued to reign, but she had Pavetta only and then miscarried twice, and it became very clear that she was not going to be able to have kids again. And he says, there you have a woman's fate. A ravaged womb scuppers her lofty ambitions. And Geralt is kind of like, well, that's really crude. But he says, I know, and the truth is also crude. And I'm like, honestly, it is really so fucked up that if a woman wasn't fertile, then that's it. She was completely useless. And they talk about how she was basically, when she realized that she couldn't have any further children and she had not yet had a son, her husband started to, like, look for other women, and she had to start worrying that he was going to bump her off because she was just not useful to him anymore. And eventually, after some time passes of her being kind of paranoid, her husband mysteriously disappears. And everybody just assumed that it was the pox because there was an epidemic happening. But it's sort of one of those things that a lot of people suspect that was not the case, and that she just used that epidemic as a nice, perfect cover for doing Lord knows what. What news you plan to circulate discreetly but widely is that Ciri is the granddaughter of a poisoner and a husband killer. And Codringer is like, how about you shut up for a second and let us finish this fucking thing? And Fen continues that she had saved her own life But she wasn't any closer to the crown. The lioness tried to seize power, but the aristocracy once again opposed this violation of law and tradition. A king was meant to sit on the throne, not a queen. A second marriage for a barren queen wasn't an option. The most the lioness could hope for was the role of queen mother. To cap it all, Pavetta's husband could turn out to be someone who might totally remove his mother-in-law from power. So he talks about how she delayed marrying off Pavetta. She wrecked the first marital project when the girl was 10, the second when she was 13. The aristocracy demanded that Pavetta's 15th birthday would be her last as a maiden. Calanthe had to agree, but first she achieved what she had been counting on. Pavetta had remained a maiden too long. She'd finally got the itch, and so badly that she was knocked up by the first stray to come along, and he was an enchanted monster to boot. So this is the thing that was read about in the first book for book club, I believe. So, am I right, Geralt? What happened next you probably recall, because yes, he was there for this whole thing. And then he talks about how she wanted to reign until the end of her days, and if not as queen mother, then as the mother of her own son. As I've already said, great ambitions, but... So she gets pregnant, and Calanthe changes her plans. If she couldn't rule through her own son, let it be Pavetta's. But Pavetta gave birth to a daughter. Queen Pavetta could still have had a child, though. She would have been able to. But a mysterious accident occurred. Pavetta and the weird Urcheon perished in an unexplained maritime disaster. So, yeah, this is like starting to get a little bit convoluted for me. Calanthe was devastated, but not for long, and her granddaughter was her final hope. And apparently Ciri, who is her granddaughter, was liked by a lot of people because she looked so much like Calanthe had as a little girl. But a lot of people, because of Ciri being the child of somebody who was a monster who had been under a spell, they think that probably she is also cursed as well. There's just a lot of theory about it. So this is when Geralt chimes in and is like, Ciri's father wasn't inferior. He was a prince from Mecht. And they're both kind of taken by surprise by this information. And it turns out the king of Mecht is Emir of Nilfgaard. And before him, Eckerspark died of pneumonia. So this is a lot of information. I am way behind time, but I wanted to give all of you guys these basic outlines of what they're talking about and the way that things went down and the ambition of Ciri's grandmother. Alleged ambition, but I would suspect that this is being told to us because it's true mostly. And these guys seem pretty good at parsing false information from real. And Ciri, being the child of a misalliance, has no rights to the throne. So they're trying to circulate that to make it so that if it does turn out, people find out she's alive, she still won't be seen as a threat. They admit that this isn't a strong case, but it is something that they can, lean on for a little bit and use as a sort of insurance. And when he asks about child of the elder blood, it would literally be not child, but daughter. It concerns some sort of elven prophecy. There are mentions of the elder blood of the elves, but we don't have the complete text of that prophecy. And Codringer is like, all of this information is going to take a lot more time and a lot of knowledge to decipher, because elven prophecies are written in such obscure ways with all of these codes and anagrams and things that finding out what this prophecy even is going to be like a full-time job. And he makes a wager with Codringer, because Codringer is playing with this metal star that he can throw with really amazing accuracy, considering how like weak and old he is. He has a little bit of energy when it comes to this thing. And he wants a percentage of whatever Geralt's making as his fee, but Geralt's like, I'm not doing this for money, guy. So you can tell me what your fee is and I'll pay it. But a percentage of nothing is nothing and you're going to get screwed. And he refuses to believe that Geralt is doing this for nothing. He's just like, come on, you expect me to believe this? And Geralt's like, I'm telling you what I'm telling you. Finally, they make this wager that this guy who has become very proficient with these throwing stars, if Geralt can dodge a throw that he makes, he will do this job for free. Or not for free. He'll do it on credit. And he makes the throw, and Geralt doesn't even move because he knows that the guy was throwing to miss. And I like that detail because this dude is obviously very shady, but he does want to help. I think that he has a sort of interest in this. And so he sort of like throws it. He says, I could hear you aiming to miss. So we go back to Aplegatt, and he has stopped at an inn to get something to eat, and he's a really practical guy. The food's pretty bad, and he just doesn't care. He's just like, whatever, I just need to eat. It's fine. And he's sitting there, and somebody speaks from the corner. It is Geralt watching him and asks where he's going. And Aplegatt is used to being questioned like this and just is like, I'm going where I'm supposed to go. So why don't you mind your business? And Geralt says something about how he should leave so that nothing happens to him. And initially, Aplegatt thinks that he is threatening him. But there is a tone to the way that this guy says it that makes him stop and reconsider if it's a threat or if it's advice. And he sort of says, like, I have to let my horse rest. I really can't just leave. And Geralt is like, all right, that's fine, rest, but don't go out into the courtyard, if you don't mind. And Aplegatt is like, just doesn't ask any more questions or say anything because he has a real sense. Aplegatt's smart in a lot of ways, to be honest. He can feel the fact that there's like something about to go down that he does not need to have anything to do with. So these guys come in and they are looking around asking people whether or not they have seen a couple of women. And they are obviously the women that Aplegatt ran into who prophesized about his death, although he doesn't know that's what it was yet. He won't know ever, probably, because he dies before he could ever put those pieces together. Have they been here? No, interrupted Aplegatt, suddenly going cold. They haven't. A messenger? Traveling from where to where? Again, he's like, mind your business. And they ask again, so you haven't run into them? And he's like, no. And the third guy is like, yeah, you're saying no real quick. And it makes us sort of feel like you aren't being honest with us. And then they start asking about how long it takes to Gore Valen, yada, yada, yada. And they're standing there, like, kind of leaving it because the messenger has a measure of respect accorded to him because of his station. And they are talking to the innkeep again when one of them notices outside that Geralt is standing there. And he yells, one of you will come out and tell me who hired you, and then you can ride away without any trouble. Or all three of you can come out. And there follows a pretty big fight, in which, of course, Geralt comes out the victor with almost no effort, to be honest. And nobody inside the inn, because Aplegatt isn't alone in there. There's a woman breastfeeding, and her husband had been, like, asleep. They're all in there as well. And there is, like, one guy who tries to get back into the inn even as he's being killed for some reason, and he, like, falls across the floor and dies there. And Geralt just has to step over him and be like, all right, so listen, innkeep, I think there's probably a bounty on these guys' heads. I don't want it. You take it. And the innkeeper's like, okay, cool, thanks. And then he says, and I have a suspicion that their guys, their friends might come around and want to know what happened to them. So let them know that the wolf bit them, the white wolf, and that it's coming for them too. So they better watch their fucking backs. So 3 days later, we have Aplegatt reaching, what is the name of it? Tretogor, because he has to see King Vizimir. But he knows that he's not actually going to see him because it's the middle of the night. So he gets brought to Dijkstra, who is basically the king's confidant and the one other person that you are allowed to give information that is supposed to be meant just for the king. And he tells him the 2 messages that I mentioned earlier in the episode. And then he sends Aplegatt back with a message. You must hold back the disguised troops. There has been a betrayal. The flame has mustered an army in Dol Angra and is only waiting for an excuse. And he has to repeat it back. He doesn't write anything down. And he wants to send him back almost immediately. And Aplegatt is like, dude, can I, sleep a little bit? And he's like, you can sleep a little, but you don't get to ask to, hang out for a few days. This is your fucking job. Stop whining, and I'm going to give you some extra money, but just do what you're being told to do. So he also tells him about seeing the Witcher. And I'm a little bit worried about what that means, but I can't think that it must be too terrible, because otherwise I don't think the Witcher would have let Aplegatt see him and see what happened. There is this moment, guys, where he thinks to himself, something itched unbearably on his back, between his left shoulder blade and his spine. A flea must have bitten him while he was resting in the stable, but there was no way to scratch it. That's where he gets shot later. So I really want to know what the fuck is up with that. What? How? Is it just supposed to be a bit of a premonition that he has? That's messed up. So later on, he's riding to bring his message back. And there are a couple of what I am assuming are elves that are hiding. And because it's never specifically said, we're just put into there. But the language that they're speaking, I believe, is meant to be Elvish. And one of them is like, oh, I'm going to kill this motherfucker. We don't need these people around. And he's like, a second elf is like, I don't like this. Just killing somebody who's a civilian for the sake of it. This isn't part of our jobs. Plus, leaving the body is going to be a problem for us. And the other one's just like, fuck you. It's not going to be a big deal. They won't find the body for ages. We'll be long gone. And one of them says something like, well, you two spent so much time arguing. There's no way you're going to hit him now. And that pretty much seals the deal. And the one elf, oh yeah, it says specifically here, the elf turned his hat around. So yeah, he is. It just takes a while before you actually know that's what's going on here. He takes that as a challenge and pulls off the shot and nails Aplegatt in that exact spot. And basically he dies instantly, which I have to say is sort of a blessing. The sand on the road was hot, heated up so much that it was painful to the touch. The messenger didn't feel it. He died at once. And that is the end of the chapter. And then we have a little excerpt of something that Dandelion wrote. And he is talking about Ciri. And he says that so many people would say that there was a sort of fell air around her that foretold of death and destruction, but that to him, that was not the case at all. That he never felt anything particularly unusual or, extraordinary around her. That she seemed like a regular kid. And, he says, nothing could have been a signal or a presentiment to those subsequent tragic events caused by her very existence and those she caused by her actions. And it wraps with Dandelion, half a century of poetry. So, I'm a little over time, but I feel like I got through everything that I needed to, because it's just a very dense chapter, just a lot of information and a lot of backstory that I feel is pretty important to go over. So, I feel like I was having a hard time with the last book, and a lot of names and places and things that I didn't understand the significance of, and really trying to hold it all in my head, because it's sort of dumped in your lap all at once. It's not like parsed out slowly over the course of the story. And I had a really difficult time like wrapping my head around it. But this book, I feel like I've got enough background that it's easier for me to keep track of who they're talking about, and easier for me to understand the connections between different rulers and lands and whatever. So yeah, I'm liking this. So thank you, Melanie, for the commission. Oh, Melanie says that she's sick today. I'm sorry, girl. I hope you feel better. And thank you all for coming and hanging out in the chat. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying the Witcher coverage. Let me know. And hopefully I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.